Howdy y'all, I'm Ice Cold, and today I'm back with another Shadow Hit Spellements idea video. So, I'm on my life wizard today because I can think of no other school that got shafted harder than life when the Polaris spells came out back in 2015. And, you know, the reason for that is this. Oh, actually, I didn't even know this happened. They buffed the. How about that? But anyway, this spell used to be pretty darn terrible. It used to only do 75 plus 375 damage on the extra overtime, but you know, they buffed it a fair amount, so maybe my spellman idea for this will be redundant when I get to it, but it did that. It did the quick little overtime, and it also did the heal overtime for 75 plus 7, 80, so that took a 5 damage, or 5 healing rather, nerf. And it was also over 3 rounds, and now it's over 5, so, you know, I'm not complaining about spell getting buffed. So there's that. But let's go ahead and get started with my idea for a Raging Bull Spellment path. So, Raging Bull in its current state does 710 to 860 fire damage to all enemies, and it detonates 1 overtime on all enemies, presumably. I have never gotten around to using that, so there's that. So, for the bottom path, you know, I would just close the gap on the low end and the high end. So, nothing too crazy there. If Team PvP does ever come back, this could be just fine, in my opinion. It would keep the AoE detonate type thing, so if somebody wanted to do like Rain of Fire into this, then, you know, that could work. So, just something simple. And then for the center 1 shad PvE path, I would just have it do a fixed amount. It would be a little above the median damage value from the base path, just so it would be an actual upgrade. And then it would do 860 fixed, which is just the upper limit of the high end, which, you know, the first upgrade there, you could make a case for it being 810 to 860 if you wanted, and then just have the last one do the 860 fixed damage. But the idea is the same. It would remain similar to the base spell in that it would have the detonate mechanic attached to it. So, you know, nothing too crazy. For the top path, as is the custom for me, I make these 2 shad top paths. This is what old Raging Bull used to do, except buffed by about 100. The Polaris spells for a lot of schools were really underwhelming. It's like really, like, the original Raging Bull concept did like 500, I want to say, on the low end. So having a nice buff for this would be good, especially because, again, 12.2 pips of value, 5% hit on the accuracy. So, you know, bringing back the AoE mantle afterward, I think it's fine. It keeps the damage from being too out of hand, and honestly, fire just needs a good high pip AoE, since Fire Dragon loses a lot of damage to the overtime, and then Rain of Fire I've only ever seen be good situationally in the Catacombs. So, how about that? And then the second upgrade along that path, usually I just close the gap on the low end by 100, but due to the range on this, I've just decided to go with 75 there. So the range would be 50 instead of the 25. So I think this would be a fine place to leave Raging Bull if it were to cost 2 shads. So Snowball Barrage is one of those that, I'm gonna keep it a bug, is already overtuned. This was a result of the Summer 2020 update, which buffed it to 95 ice damage per pip to all enemies from 85. And I think that there's a couple mechanics in this one that I would want to introduce. The first one is on the PvP path, and what this would do is it would take down the damage per pip from 95 to 75, but it would add in this concept from the summer 2020 test realm, where they proposed adding an extra fixed flat damage to the spell on top of the DPP that it got. So when it comes to PvP, I think this would be just fine. You know, an extra 150 on top of 75 per pip. I don't really see a problem with that, especially because the main issue with it would be way too strong at higher pip values, and with the 75 per pip, yeah, it would get 2 extra pips worth of value at lower values, but you're not really using shads at lower values that much, to be completely honest. So I think it would be just fine if it got just a slight amount of fixed flat damage on top of the DPP that it got, and then it goes up to 170 on the flat after that. So the center path, this is the median for base freeze ray, and the reason being is because since Snowball Barrage is an X-Pip spell, there are situations where, you know, you're in a dungeon, you've cleared a couple mob fights, and, you know, your shad gauge is already built up, but you would have to really wait to be able to use the spell at its full potential. So with this concept, this would reduce, or it would fix the pip cost rather to 6 plus the shad, and it would do the according damage value that we saw with freeze ray, or rather the median value of 805, and then it would go up to 835 at the second upgrade. Just something simple, seems fine to me. And then, you know, for the 2 shad paths on some of these, I'll be completely honest, I really didn't think that these spells needed a buff from their 1 shad versions, so I basically just tacked on an extra 20 and 25 DPP to it and called it there, because you know, the extra shad would make it worth. So, you know, nothing. I think it would be fine, especially since base Snowball Barrage is already very strong. Rusalka's Wrath has been in a strange spot as of late. It's undergone more changes than I think any other shad spell to be introduced in the game. So I figured, why not vary it up a little more? So for, you know, the base path, it gives 1395 damage, which is a little low, but that is made up for by its after effects. You either get a 45% Storm Blade or a 45% Heal Charm. And, you know, there are some people out there who think that the Heal Charm is just flat out redundant. It's not a good thing for a spell like Rusalka to have, especially at the cost of DPP. And I honestly agree, but at the same time, you know, there are situations where it can be useful. So I'm just sort of leaving it, and I also don't want to really increase the damage too much, because, you know, if I got rid of that Guiding Light, then, you know, I would have to increase the damage just a ton, and I don't know that's a particularly good idea. You can even see with the center path. I wasn't sure, so yeah. It would just be a basic increase in damage for the PvP path. For the center path, basic damage increase, except it would get rid of the guiding light, and it would just give the 50% chance to be given back the 45 blade, which, you know, I mean, there was already no downside to getting the guiding light in PvE, but getting a guaranteed, or not guaranteed, but having a chance to just get the blade allows the damage to go up just a little bit. So I think that's a fine place to leave it for the 1 shad PvE path. For the 2 shad PvE path, I just decided to give it a pretty hefty damage increase and a guaranteed 45 blade. This would be above where Storm Owl used to be in terms of value. It would be roughly the same, I want to say, in terms of damage. So, you know, again, with the 12.2 pips of value and the lower accuracy, I think this is fine for Storm. So, Witch's House Call, commonly just called Baba Yaga, is another Polaris spell that ended up becoming very, very overtuned. It has been this way since the summer 2020 update, and really even before then. It was super strong, because it would just do so much damage, and I think that it's leaving it where it is in PvE without giving it too much of a buff would be good for the center path. So that's honestly just pretty self-explanatory. I don't really need to go into too much detail on that. But I nerfed it by 100 on the PvP path, just because it just has so much of a presence at max level PvP, especially for the utility it has. I mean, summoning a minion, it's the only way Myth can summon a minion, even if that minion does pretty much nothing anymore. But I think it would just be good for a school like Myth, who, you know, doesn't get as much damage anymore, to not be able to just threaten a one-shot and win trades, especially with how stats are right now. This nerf would really just be more of a stat balancing type contingency, because as you've seen people say, I'm sure, Storms sending a Rusalka versus a Myth's Baba Yaga, the Yaga, despite having lower base damage, will win the trade by, you know, like a 4-digit number, which is not good. So this would balance it out a little bit. And then for the top path, I figured, you know, might as well go all in on the damage, so I just sent it up to 1280. I did 105 times 12.2 and got 1281, so 1280. Simple as. 105 being Myth's DPP, from what I've seen at least. I used old Celestial Calendar to compare, just to keep the general theme of the top path bringing back old type damage. So it's strong, but you know, it costs 2 shads and all that. So that'll wrap up Myth. So as we saw with Life, Wings of Fate did actually get buffed in the patch that happened this morning. Recording this the 28th of September. So it's in a better place now than what it was. So my concept is a little more redundant, but I think it could make for just some basic, I guess, QOL type stuff, some balancing rather, to because this gives a whole lot of value. I mean, protected OT, that's pretty crazy if you were to ask me. So especially with all that damage. So I'm looking at, you know, base Wings of Fate and then I would change the PvP path to actually do something a little bit new. I would have it put a 500 overtime on all opponents, and then I would have it put a 700 deferred overtime on all friends, and both of those would last for 3 rounds. You could go with 5, especially if I'm going to be making this change to an AoE, but you know, just I don't even think a deferred heal overtime has ever been tried. Yeah, I don't think it has been. So this could be a cool new mechanic, and you know, it could balance out team PvP a little more. Burst healing is gone, so having a deferred heal overtime would just it would make the player have to react quickly, because you know, a spell like Gearhead would absolutely destroy the spell. So it's high risk, but also very high reward if the player does not counter it. So there's that. And then for the top path, I basically just went with the Lord of the Jungle base damage, except I increased it by a little bit to account for the fact that it wouldn't be doing anything with the absorbs. So, you know, just 810 flat and then 840 flat, I think is fine. Winged Sorrow has been in a rough place for quite some time at this point. It already got outclassed by Kisma's Curse for a long time, and then when it finally didn't after the summer 2020 update, it still just wasn't on par with all the other shads. It does low damage, and its after effect really takes away a lot of value, because it's a minus 20% plague to everyone on the opposing side, even though it's a single target hit. So, you know, I think that increasing the weakness aspect of it on all 3 paths up to 40% would make this one kind of just, I guess, interchangeable with how Grim Reader works, because Reader adds 2 35 weaknesses chromatic, whereas this version of Winged Sorrow would only add 1, and it would be universal. And because of the whole universal thing, it would do more damage than what Reader can get up to currently. So I think it's alright. You know, a total of 860 to 980. It's still got quite a range on it at 120 damage, but the 40 universal weakness, I think, would make this a very balanced spell, in PvP at least. For PvE, I basically just did the same thing, but increased the damage a little bit. And then for the T-Shad path, this draws inspiration from where this was during the summer 2020 test realm. It, in one of the patches, I think it was the July 13th patch that year, it did 940 to 1120, which is crazy for a death spell. So I just went ahead and went in the middle with that, doing 1030 and then upgraded to 1070 with a 40 weakness. So I think that's a good place to leave it, I think. Even though some of my ideas can be kind of unbalanced, I think this is one of my better jobs at balancing a shadow spell. Nested Fury is one of my favorite balance spells, just because you finally have a counter to all those balance bosses. So, you know, but an issue that I have with both Nested and with the Lernian Hydra spell that I am currently using to try and level up on my balance. Rolling ice can be pretty debilitating. It can make the difference between killing and not killing. So for the center path here, I just decided to I bumped up the damage on all 3 schools by 30 on the first upgrade, but I left Fire and Storm's values alone on the second, but bumped up Ice's by 85, just so it would be a more consistent spell. For the PvP path, I just decided to return this to what Old Nested was. It would be random between Fire, Ice, and Storm, but it wouldn't, be affected by the school that it was hitting with. So it would all 3 schools would do the same damage, depending on which one gets rolled. And, the damage would also be lower on this, which would balance it in Team PvP. For the top path, I decided to bring back the Echo mechanic that Hydra has, and that I also gave to Glowbug Squall, I believe, in my last video. And this would be obviously no PvP because the Echo comes before, but it would act as Hydra, but the Echo mechanic is offensive instead of defensive. It would echo up to 3 blades across the entire opposing side, and it would give the caster 35 blades, universal blades, and then it would hit for 405 fire, 405 ice, and 405 storm, upgraded to 415 at the max tier. And it would use the 3 echoed blades on top of everything else that you added. So, strong as it would be, it would not work well with feints. So, I think it's a worthy trade-off, and could add an interesting dynamic to the spell. So for Mirage, I actually had a bit of a different idea, and you might like this one, actually. I'm going to go ahead and toss up the fire concept that I made. It basically just, you still have the 3 paths, but I decided to not do a 2 shad path, just because, the single hits that cost 5 or 6 shads exist for every school, so it would be a little redundant to have a 4-pip that does the same. So, for the center and PvP paths, I would keep the divide feature. However, it would still need to be divisible by 4, which is why you see, 888 on the bottom. So I just didn't want to buff it all the way to 900. And, there's not any real nice round numbers between 880 and 900, so went ahead with 888. And you could really do any value for these. They're not going to be as strong, but they're fine, right? But it's the top path that I had a bit of an interesting idea for. For the top path, you could do just a 4-pip shad AoE, and these would be worth 7.6 pips. I just went ahead and used King Art, the Fire King Art rather, for a reference, and then just got 75% of that, so that would fit the bill for an AoE. Because, sometimes there are situations where you are just running through a dungeon and you fill up your shad meter, like let's say you're doing Dazan Duelist, and you get your shad on the first round of the final fight of that dungeon. And you think, oh, well, I want to take out the minions, make sure they can't turn my Storm teammates' blades into 55% Storm weaknesses, because, you know, game design. So what you would do is you could use the AoE path, and, you know, you would enchant it. It would do base 960 damage, and it would use 4 pips and a shad, and you would be able to just send a Scorching Scimitar at everyone. Pretty simple, without losing damage for dividing it. And, I mean, you know, the divide feature would still exist, but everybody just uses it for single hits anyways, let's be honest. So, yeah, no mind the Cyclops, but it would just be a good alternative, because these spells are pretty useless for a lot of schools, but there are schools like fire, like ice, or I guess technically not ice because of Snowball Barrage's existence, but fire, life is another one. You could use Lamasu instead of having to wait for Wings or Lord of the Jungle on the first round, just to clear the minions quicker. And it would just make fights it would just make fights smoother if you had the option to turn your 4-pip divide spell from Mirage into an AoE. This would fill the void that a lot of schools that, you know, don't get an AoE from Darkmoor have. I guess really this would just affect fire, life, and balance, but, you know, you could always have the fixed 4-pip AoEs for ice as well, just in case you didn't want to dump all your pips on Snowball Barrage, but, you know, is what it is. So, yep, that's going to wrap up the Mirage idea. Thank you all once again for watching. Let me know what you thought of the spell ideas in the comment section below, especially the Mirage take, because I don't think I'm particularly clever for coming up with it, but I think it would be a good addition. And who knows, you might too. You might not have ever thought of the Mirage divide spells that way either. And, you know, maybe it's time we lobby King's Isle and try and get that to happen. But thank y'all for watching. Be sure to like, subscribe, and leave like 50 comments for the algorithm, and I'll see you in the next one. Good night.